If you've been following this channel for a while, you already know that every time Jimin speaks honestly, truly, unfiltered, from the heart, it hits different. Not just for the fans who've been there from the beginning, but even for people who are just now discovering who ParkJimin really is. And this time was something else entirely. Because after 3 nights at Stanford Stadium, 3 sold-out nights in front of nearly 50,000 people each, Jimin sat down at a dinner table with RM, V, and J-Hope, opened up Weverse Live on the 20th of May, 2026, and said things that no one fully expected to hear. Things that were honest, raw, personal. The kind of words that remind you why this man has one of the most devoted fan bases on the entire planet. So today, we're going to break down everything. What happened at Stanford, what Jimin said, what it meant, and why, after all these years, after the hiatus and the military service and the waiting and the uncertainty, this moment at Stanford might just be the most important chapter in Jimin's story so far. Stay until the end, because we're going to talk about one thing Jimin said that ARMY is still talking about right now. And if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button. We cover Jimin's journey in depth every single week. Let's get into it. First, let's set the scene. Because you can't understand what Jimin said on that Weverse Live without understanding what Stanford actually was, and what it meant for BTS as a whole. Stanford Stadium, Palo Alto, California, May 16th, 17th, and 19th, 2026. 3 sold-out nights, nearly 50,000 fans each evening. Purple light sticks stretching as far as the eye could see. Fireworks, confetti, a 360-degree stage in the middle of the field that turned every single person in that stadium into part of the show itself. BTS launched the first of 3 sold-out Arirang World Tour performances at Stanford Stadium on May 16th, marking the group's long-awaited return to large-scale touring after nearly 4 years away. For years, let that sink in. The last time BTS performed as a full group in the Bay Area was 8 years ago. 8 years of growing, evolving, going on hiatus, completing military service, and now, finally, returning bigger than ever. Between South Korea's mandatory military service and the cancellation of the map of the Seoul World Tour, BTS fans have been waiting far longer than expected to see the 7-member group perform together again. So walking into that stadium on May 16th wasn't just another concert night. For ARMY, it was the culmination of years of waiting, years of patience, years of trusting that their boys would come back. And BTS delivered. Throughout Sunday night, they laughed, joked, and swore. Jimin and Jungkook did flips during Dynamite that Jungkook later admitted might have tweaked his back. V lovingly called the crowd F-King good, while J-Hope said they heard about Stanford's sound ordinance and said, "Hell no." That's the energy these 3 nights were running on. Pure, chaotic, joyful, uncontainable BTS energy. The kind of energy that only happens when 7 people who genuinely love each other are finally free. Free to perform, free to be themselves, free to give everything they have to the people who waited for them. As RM took in the night, he at times seemed contemplative. "Honestly," he said late in the show, "I just hope you had a great time, because time flies. Life is too short." And then there was Jimin. As Jimin delivered the memorable chorus during They Don't Know About Us, and like animals, followed with soaring harmonies and one of the night's strongest vocal showcases. Review after review from people who attended the shows kept coming back to the same thing. Jimin's vocals stopped people cold. People who had never been to a BTS concert, people who barely knew the music, walked away talking about Jimin's voice. Jimin steals the spotlight during the Arirang Stanford Stadium shows. Other sweet moments, including his gentle safety reminders at the barricade, warmed hearts. Meanwhile, fans noted that Jimin looks cool no matter if his hair is down or tied up, long or short, blonde or black. And then, the viral moment that had everyone screaming. During one moment on stage, Jimin and Jungkook jokingly lifted each other's shirts while performing, which drew loud reactions from the audience. Of course it did, because these two, Jimin and Jungkook, have this magical ability to turn any stage moment into something that feels both completely unplanned and completely perfect at the same time. But perhaps the most quietly significant detail about the Stanford run wasn't even a performance moment. It was something that happened off stage. some of which may have had to do with the fact the members have been relaxing in the Bay all week, shopping at the mall and going to Great America without being bothered. There's something deeply human about that. These 7 men, arguably the biggest musical act on the planet right now, spending their downtime between shows going to an amusement park like regular people. And Suga impressed fans after it was revealed that he had participated in the Bay to Breakers race earlier that day. According to fan discussions online, Suga reportedly completed a 12 kilometers run before joining the concert later in the evening. The man ran 12 kilometers the same day he performed for 50,000 people. Min Yoongi is simply built different, and we will not be arguing about this. But back to Jimin. Because after the final curtain fell on the last Stanford show, May 19th, after the confetti dropped and the light sticks dimmed and 50,000 fans slowly filed out of the stadium with tears on their faces and memories they will carry for the rest of their lives. What happened next is what we're here to talk about. Jimin, RM, V, and J-Hope gathered around a dinner table. And they went live, May 20th, 2026. Weverse Live. For members, 1 camera, food on the table, and nobody performing for an audience anymore. Just 4 friends who had just finished something massive, sitting together and letting the world watch them be human. These are the moments ARMY lives for. Not the stage version of BTS, though that version is extraordinary. But this version, the version that shows up after the work is done, when the armor comes off and there's nothing left to maintain except honesty. And Jimin was honest. Now, this is not the first time Jimin has spoken candidly about the weight of returning to the stage. If you've been following his journey, you know that after the very first Arirang World Tour show at Goyang Stadium on April 9th, Jimin addressed fans through a live broadcast on Weverse, where he reflected on the performance. He noted that heavy rain and technical issues affected parts of the show, and he added that these elements made the performance feel more difficult than expected. Jimin also spoke about the pressure he felt returning to the stage after a long hiatus. It felt a bit burdensome and difficult, and though the desire to see you all was greater, I felt like I had to do well to repay you for how long you waited, so I don't think I went on stage with a light heart. Read that again. I don't think I went on stage with a light heart. That is a man who carries the weight of other people's expectations alongside his own. That is a man who loves so deeply that the thought of disappointing the people who waited for him felt heavier than the performance itself. That was April 9th, the very first show of the entire tour. Now fast forward to May 20th. After Stanford, after 3 consecutive sold-out nights in the Bay Area, after Like Animals and Fake Love and Flips during Dynamite, and 50,000 fans singing back every single word. What changed? Everything. Because the Jimin who sat at that dinner table on May 20th was not the same Jimin who stood on the Goyang stage with trembling hands and a heavy heart. The Stanford leg of this tour did something to him. Something shifted, and he talked about it. Jimin said he didn't expect Stanford to be like this. And that sentence, as simple as it sounds, carries so much inside it that it deserves to be unpacked carefully. Think about what Jimin's relationship with expectations has looked like across his career. This is a person who, by his own admission, rarely allows himself to expect too much because the fear of falling short of those expectations, both his own and other people's, has historically been one of the heaviest things he carries. The Goyang Live showed us that. The pre-tour anxieties showed us that. Even going back further, his honesty about the pressure he felt during the Map of the Soul era, the pressure he felt after Like Crazy became a global hit, the pressure of being solo, all of it points to the same thing. Jimin holds himself to a standard that most people can't even see from the outside. So when Jimin says he didn't expect Stanford to be like this, what he's really saying is that what happened at Stanford exceeded not just the crowd's expectations, not just ARMY's expectations, but his own. And that is a big deal. That is a man who spent years carrying doubt and anxiety about whether he could meet the bar he had set for himself, finally arriving at a moment where reality was better than what he had imagined. The response from the ARMY crowd across all 3 nights clearly moved him in ways he wasn't fully prepared for. The roar of 50,000 people singing his parts back to him. The purple sea that seemed to stretch to the horizon. The emotion on the faces of fans he could see from the stage, some of whom had been waiting for this concert for years. Some of whom had bought tickets when the Map of the Soul tour was announced back in 2020, and then watched that dream get cancelled. And then waited and then waited some more. Jimin saw all of that, and it hit him differently than he expected. There's something else worth talking about here, because it adds another layer to Jimin's Stanford confession. When Jimin enlisted in December 2023, he went live on Weverse beforehand and told ARMY exactly what he was thinking about. During his live broadcast, Jimin talked about how he is feeling and what he is going to do after completing his military service. He also unveiled his shaved head, and he got shy and teary. He talked about the tour. He talked about wanting to perform again. He talked about the promise that BTS would come back, all 7 of them, and give ARMY everything they had been building toward during those years apart. That was December 2023, 19 months before Stanford. Think about the journey between those 2 moments. The service, the waiting, the solo work during discharge, the physical and emotional preparation for the Arirang album and tour, the anxiety of the Goyang opening night, the Tampa shows, the El Paso shows, and then finally, after all of that, Stanford. Jimin showing up at that dinner table on May 20th and saying he didn't expect it to be like this is the payoff of a promise he made to himself and to ARMY nearly 2 years earlier. That he would come back, that he would give everything, and that when the moment finally arrived, it would be worth everything they went through to get there. It was. But the Stanford Weverse Live on May 20th wasn't only about reflection. Because this is BTS, and this is Jimin, and things around him are never one-dimensional. There was also the energy of the room itself. RM, V, J-Hope. For people who have known each other for over a decade, who have been through everything together, the highs and the lows, the global stadium tours and the quiet years apart, sitting around a table eating after the biggest shows of their current era. The dynamic between these 4 that night told its own story. RM, as always, oscillating between profound and ridiculous within the same sentence. V being V, unpredictable, deeply present, occasionally surreal. J-Hope radiating the kind of warmth that makes everyone in a room feel like things are going to be okay. And Jimin, grounded in a way that felt new. Like someone who had just crossed a finish line and was allowing himself, for the first time in a long time, to actually rest. This is the version of Jimin that ARMY most deeply loves. Not the perfectly polished performer, though that version is extraordinary. But this version, the version that sits at a dinner table after the show and tells the truth about how it felt. After years of uncertainty, pressure and anxiety, it was clear that BTS, now on the biggest tour of their career, are finally at ease. And Jimin, on May 20th, was finally at ease. Now, I want to take a moment here to talk about something broader. Because the Stanford chapter isn't just significant for what it means to Jimin personally. It's significant for what it represents in the arc of BTS as a group. When BTS went on hiatus in June 2022, they were at the absolute peak of their commercial power. Butter had broken streaming records. They had sold out stadiums across 3 continents. They were receiving Grammy nominations. Every metric said they were untouchable. And then they stopped. Voluntarily. Because they had to, because their country required it, but also because they chose to face it honestly rather than find ways around it. They could have lobbied for alternative service. They chose the military. They could have used their industry position to delay. They didn't. That decision, to step away at the height of everything, was both the hardest and the most important thing BTS ever did. Because it meant that what came after the military wasn't a group trying to recapture past glory. It was a group that had spent years apart, grown as individuals, and then come back with something new to say. The Arirang album is that something new. And the world tour, Stanford included, is the proof that it landed. BTS leaned heavily into the album's themes of Korean identity, reinvention, and artistic freedom at Stanford. These were not men trying to be the version of BTS from 2019. These were men who had lived through something and were performing from that lived experience. The difference is audible. The difference is visible. And ARMY felt it, which is exactly why 50,000 people cried during I Need You at a show in California in 2026. Because the song hit differently coming from people who had actually been through something. Let's also talk about what this means specifically for Jimin going forward. Because the Stanford confession has implications beyond just this one moment. Jimin going into the tour carried the same weight he always carries. The weight of wanting to be exceptional, not just good. The kind of standard he holds for himself is both his greatest strength and, at times, his greatest burden. We saw it at Goyang. We see it whenever he talks about his performances, his music, his artistry. But Stanford seems to have given him something he needed. Evidence. Concrete. Undeniable. 50,000 voices strong evidence that what he is doing is connecting. That the work is landing. That the waiting and the military, and the anxiety, and the discipline, and the 10,000 hours of practice were not in vain. When Jimin says he didn't expect Stanford to be like this, he is not being falsely modest. He is being honest about the gap between his expectations and reality. A gap that, for once, went in a direction he wasn't fully prepared for. Reality was better. And the proof of that is written all over the Stanford performances themselves. Throughout the concert, Jimin led the stage with explosive vocal power and dazzling performances. He showcased light footwork and spins, running to every corner of the protruding stage on the 360-degree setup, waving to fans and making eye contact. The venue was reportedly filled with voices chanting his name. Not just cheering, chanting. Specifically, his name. Think about what that feels like for someone who walked into this tour carrying the weight of wanting to repay the people who waited. You come out on stage, and instead of the crowd just responding to the show as a whole, they're calling for you. They see you specifically. They are cheering not just for BTS, but for ParkJimin standing in front of them. In his final farewell at Stanford, Jimin said, "I was truly happy that your voices filled this place today," and added, "It will get colder as night falls, so please all return safely." That's so Jimin. The entire stadium just gave him 3 nights of their lives. Tears, screaming, purple light sticks, everything. And his closing thought is to make sure they stay warm on the way home. The care runs in both directions with this man, and it always has. But what made Stanford uniquely powerful for Jimin wasn't just the crowd response, as extraordinary as that was. It was also what happened on that stage, in terms of his craft. Because the looser choreography also gave the vocalists extra prominence. Jin, Jungkook, Jimin, and V were able to let go without worrying as much about staying in lockstep. That detail matters more than it might initially seem. One of the most frequent pieces of criticism that gets leveled at large-scale K-pop productions, and at BTS specifically, is that the synchronized choreography can sometimes come at the cost of individual vocal expressiveness. You're so focused on hitting every mark perfectly that there's less room to breathe into a phrase, to let a note linger, to be spontaneous. The Arirang World Tour stage design, with its 360-degree format, created something different. It created space, and Jimin, in that space, delivered the kind of vocal performances that had people who had never heard a BTS song in their lives walking out of Stanford Stadium specifically talking about him. Like Animals, followed with soaring harmonies and one of the night's strongest vocal showcases. Multiple reviews pointed to that specific moment as a standout. Not just a standout BTS moment, a standout concert moment full stop. The kind of thing that reminds you that before the choreography, before the visuals, before the production, there is a voice. And Jimin's voice at Stanford in May 2026 was doing something that could not be ignored. Jimin's warrior styling, soaring vocals, and effortless dance moves dominated fan chatter online. He ranked number 1 in the May 2026 Boy Group Individual Brand Reputation Survey. Keyword analysis identified Army, World Tour, and Mexico as major keywords, and link analysis revealed high scores for perfect, enthusiastic, and breakthrough. Breakthrough. That word is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and it deserves to sit with us for a moment. Because a breakthrough isn't something that happens to someone who is already at the top of their game. A breakthrough is what happens when someone transcends the level they were already operating at and arrives somewhere new. That is what Stanford was for Jimin. Not a return to form. Not a reminder of what he's capable of. A breakthrough into something he hadn't fully accessed before. A version of himself that had been built through the military years, the solo work, the patience, the preparation, and the willingness to carry doubt all the way to the stage and perform through it anyway. And on the other side of all of that, Stanford was waiting. And if you know anything about ParkJimin and the way he has historically struggled to fully believe in his own impact, you understand just how significant that statement is. There is one more thing to talk about before we close, and it goes back to that dinner table on May 20th. For members, late at night, cameras rolling, And in the middle of all the food and laughter and chaotic energy that is just inherently what happens when these four men are in a room together, there was a quieter moment. A moment where the noise settled and Jimin said something that, for everyone watching, felt like the truest thing he had said in a long time. He said he was grateful, not in the performative, press release kind of way, in the way that only comes out at the end of something big, when you're sitting with people who were in it with you, and the adrenaline has finally faded, and what's left is just the feeling of having done something real. Grateful for the crowd, grateful for his members, grateful for ARMY's patience, grateful, maybe most of all, for the fact that after everything, the hiatus, the uncertainty, the military, the long road back, he was sitting at this table, in this city, having just performed 3 nights at Stanford Stadium, and he was okay. More than okay. That is the Jimin confession that matters. Not the curated version. Not the version crafted for an interview or a magazine spread. The version that comes out at 2 a.m. over dinner with your closest people around you when the work is done and the truth is the only thing left. And that is exactly why we cover Jimin the way we do on this channel. Because moments like this one, the May 20th Weverse Live, the dinner table, the honest words after Stanford, are the moments that define who an artist really is. Not the records, not the chart positions, not the streaming numbers. Those things matter, and we cover them too. But they are not the whole story. The whole story is a person who walked into a stadium carrying doubt and walked out carrying something he didn't expect. The knowledge that everything he gave was enough. More than enough. That the people who waited for him saw him clearly, loved him fully, and gave him back exactly what he had given them. ParkJimin didn't expect Stanford to be like this. But Stanford was exactly what he deserved. If this video moved you even a little bit, if Jimin's story resonates with you the way it resonates with millions of ARMY around the world, drop a comment below. Tell us your favorite Jimin moment from the Stanford run. Tell us what you felt watching that Weverse Live. Tell us what this era means to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. We are covering the Arirang World Tour in depth. Every leg, every show, every Weverse Live, every moment that matters. Las Vegas is coming. The Europe leg is coming. And Jimin is going to keep giving us things to talk about because that is just who he is. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with your fellow ARMY. We'll see you in the next one. I purple you.